Dear Sunday School teacher, good morning. I'm so happy to be with you today on this episode of Adult Sunday School. The topic of our lesson today is titled Having the Mind of Christ, and our text is drawn from the book of Philippians chapter 2 from verse 1 right down to 13. By the end of this lesson, your students should be able to describe the pattern of the mind of Christ and also discuss some key things that we need to do in order to cultivate the mind of Christ. Apostle Paul wrote this letter to the Philippian Christians while he was in prison, and it is presumed that there was disunity amongst the brethren in Philippi. And so when you look at Philippians chapter 2 verse 1 right down to 4, he is addressing the issue of disunity in the church, and he urges them to be in one mind and to have the mind of Christ. Very important model to follow. But how will they have the mind of Christ if they do not understand the pattern of Christ's mind? And so Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 2 verse 5 right down to verse 9 describes that pattern very clearly, and it's very simple for us to understand. When you look at Philippians chapter 2 verse 6, the first thing he highlights is that Christ existed or pre-existed as God. And being God, he humbled himself and came down to earth in human form as a bond servant to serve mankind. He was killed because of his obedience to God, sacrificed on the cross for our sake. And having gone through this humiliation, God exalted him above all other names. And so the pattern is a circle, and it's very simple. It starts from God being God. It starts from Jesus Christ being God. Then he comes down to earth, he is humiliated, he goes through pain and suffering, and then he is later on exalted above all other names. So as a Christian, to solve the problem of disunity in the church, it is important for an individual or a group of people to go through this pattern of humiliation and exaltation. Humiliation and exaltation. And when we talk of humiliation here, what does it mean? It means that some people should be ready to sacrifice their pride or sacrifice their self-centeredness and serve humanity, or regard or consider other people better than them in love, because that's exactly what Christ did. You cannot have the mind of Christ if you are not ready to let go, if you are not ready to sacrifice your ego, if you are not ready to show love and let go, even if someone hurts you, irrespective of what the person did or who the person is. And so Apostle Paul is urging us to have the mind of Christ, and one of which is to be ready to go through humiliation, and then so that we can be exalted. So there's always a gain after humiliation. That is what I want us to know. So it is important for us to understand that in our last lesson we learned that Apostle Paul made a very powerful statement that for him to live is Christ and for him to die is gain. What he actually meant here was the other pattern, the pattern we have just discussed, because for him to live is Christ means that he has to be ready to sacrifice himself and go through the pain. And for him to die is gain, meaning the gain is the exaltation and glorification at the end. So we need to understand as believers that irrespective of the challenges that we face in our groups, if there is any disunity, we have to understand that deep reverence and love for God and sacrificing our self-centeredness or any behavior or any desire that focuses more on us will help us to go through that humiliation. And each time you go through a humiliation, each time you're being humiliated for the sake of Christ, be sure that exaltation is on the way. Nowadays, many Christians, many people are distracted by many things in the world. So it makes it difficult for people to have the mind of Christ and focus sole or single-mindedly on Christ. And so from time to time, you have to ask yourself this question: what things do I focus my attention on more? And ask yourself this question as well: what did Christ spend most of his time thinking about? If you spend most of your time thinking about yourself, you are likely going to evade humiliation and expect exaltation, which is not the case. But if you spend more time thinking about Jesus Christ, you are going to develop the heart and mind of Christ. This way, You will let go things that you do not like, and God will exalt you on the last day. Thank you very much for listening. My name is Shejini, and hope to see you in the next episode. If you did like this video, do not hesitate to share it to others on the school teacher, like it, and subscribe as well. Thank you very much. Have a blessed day.